So it's possible to build a simple bit of electronics. This is something that we built to prove the concept, but it's possible for criminals to make much smaller ones, and in fact criminals have been making much smaller versions of this. And what this device does is you put the card in to the device. You could put this up your sleeve if you want, and then it will trick the terminal into thinking that the PIN is correct by telling the terminal that the PIN is correct, but telling the card that there's a signature transaction going through, and therefore the card will never see any PIN, let alone the wrong PIN or the correct PIN.
If your credit or debit card details are used without your consent, you should not have to pay for the losses. Your card provider can't refuse to reimburse you unless they have evidence that you've acted fraudulently or with gross negligence.
The biggest problem with chip and PIN is that the banks are dumping the liability for fraud onto merchants and customers. If a customer disputes a transaction, the banks look at the logs, and if the logs say that the transaction wasn't authorized by PIN, they just reverse it back to the merchant. But if the logs say that the transaction was authenticated by means of a PIN, then they'll say that the customer was negligent or must have been mistaken or complicit or lying.
So what we found is it's possible to trick a chip and PIN terminal into accepting a transaction even when the wrong PIN has been entered. You could type in any PIN you want, 0000, but the terminal will say that the PIN has been verified correctly, and that's the receipt that the bank will use to try to pin the blame on the customer.
We've produced a number of papers which have shown flaws in the chip and PIN system, and the banks have typically tried to pretend that there wasn't a problem, or to ignore it, or to simply stop it becoming a public issue. In one case, where we showed how people were tampering with chip and PIN terminals, the banks refused to help the police prosecute the two people who were responsible for the fraud. And more recently, when we showed how it was possible for bad guys to manipulate signals between cards and terminals so that the wrong PINs could be used, rather than fixing the problem, the banks simply demanded that the student thesis that described all this should be taken down from the web.
Chip and PIN is a convenient payment method, but card providers should recognise that the vast majority of their customers are law-abiding and don't deliberately put their card details at risk. We'd like the payment card sector to acknowledge this and process refunds immediately. Anything short of this isn't allowed under the regulations and sends a bad message out to consumers. For all our free advice on what to look out for and how to deal with card fraud, click on the link below.